Welcome back to the show, everybody. On today's episode, we have Kyle Baum. Kyle Baum is an RN, BSN with a degree in exercise science. He's a certified exercise physiologist, precision nutrition certified, and he is the owner of No Limit Physiques LLC. I do use Kyle on a day-to-day basis. He is awesome. He's a friend of mine, a former guest, and someone I'm excited to get back on the show. Today's episode is brought to you by All Black Everything Performance Energy Drink, the official energy drink of the Athletic Fortitude podcast, available in Walmart, Meijer, and select GNC franchise locations. This episode is also brought to you by Medal. Are you a student athlete looking to take your game to the next level, or a parent wanting to support your young athlete's mental performance? Let me introduce you to Medal, the ultimate mental performance coaching platform designed specifically for student athletes. Medal combines cutting-edge, AI technology with expert human coaching to help athletes build mental toughness, boost confidence, and perform under pressure. Whether you're struggling with pregame jitters, recovering from an injury, or just want to sharpen your mental edge, Medal has you covered. The best part? Medal offers flexible pricing tiers to fit any budget, starting at just $49 a month. That's less than the cost of a single session with most sports psychologists. Ready to unlock your full potential? Visit Medal.coach today and use the code podcast for a special 10% discount on your first month. Remember, champions are made in the mind. With Medal, you're not just playing the game, you're mastering it. And with that said, on today's show, Kyle Baum. Artificial sweeteners, what's the science saying about those?
Okay, so I can go off on a tangent about this, but basically the bottom line here is like, okay, so in social media world today, right, we have people that have like what I honestly call like cult followings, kind of like they have millions of followers, and kind of whatever they spew is like gospel, right? And I think that does us a lot of disservice in a lot of aspects in terms of a lot of topics, but this is heavily related to artificial sweeteners. And the media is also a big proponent of this, but there's just a lot of fear mongering. And the problem with this is like when you have these personalities saying, certain statements, their following just kind of takes as gospel, like I said, and never actually looked into the studies themselves. And obviously the problem with that is things are misconstrued and, just kind of generalized, right? But I've taken the time, and I'm not the only one that has, but like, if you actually take the time to actually break down these studies, you will see that a lot of it is exactly that. It's fear mongering. Most of the studies with aspartame you hear about, like whatever it is, whatever artificial sweetener you want to name, is like most of the time they're done in rats or they're done in vitro. So they're not very applicable to humans in the first place. And then number two is like they're given in doses and amounts that humans couldn't consume definitely in a day, and dude, sometimes even in a lifetime. Like they're that concentrated amounts in these studies. And it's like, how can we make those bold rationalizations that they cause cancer, whatever fear mongering that they want to, push upon people? It's just, in all those studies, it's just not really relevant, and it's stupid, to be honest with you. And so I do have a very strong opinion about it. But the other thing too is like, dude, in my nursing career, just to kind of give you some perspective, like I would walk into a patient's room, right, and they'd be like, "Oh no," they would say like they wanted something to drink, and they'd specify soda, and be like, "Do you want diet or regular?" And they'd be like, "Oh, definitely not diet. Like I don't want the artificial sweeteners." And it's like, you'd look at their blood work and they're like, well, first of all, they're like overweight and their HbA1c is like 9. And it's like, you probably would be a lot better off, or probably wouldn't necessarily be in the situation you are today if you just had, a diet soda every once in a while. Like in the grand scheme of things, in terms of like metabolic health, that's going to have a lot less of a negative impact, an occasional diet soda. Obviously everything in moderation, but I think that's going to have a lot less of a negative impact on your health than constantly having these like full sugar sodas and things like that,
What's the difference between sugar and artificial sweeteners? How do they separate and have a similar taste? but not actually have what sugar has?
So to be honest with you, they're sugar substitutes. So it's something to do with the molecules themselves. I'm not exactly like the molecular level. I'm not exactly sure, but they just produce the same, like whatever their molecule structure is. It's similar, and they're synthetic versions, but they produce that certain type of sweetness that obviously sugar has. So that's kind of the difference. But I'm not a complete like expert in terms of like the molecules themselves. I'm actually not really totally sure.
So why is sugar then bad for you? What is it about sugar that's inherently bad for you as a person or an athlete?
I think number one is pro-inflammatory to a large degree. Like you hear like added sugars and stuff like that. It's like it's pro-inflammatory, which can have a whole host of like downstream effects in metabolic health and cardiovascular health down the line. And then number two is just with insulin resistance. There's a whole host of issues with that too. The less insulin resistant you are, the worse you're going to be at partitioning nutrients. Glucose in your bloodstream at a higher than our homeostasis level is not a good thing. So, hear about like things like diabetics will have vascular issues. They have delayed wound healing. There's a whole host of things that are not optimal whenever you have poor metabolic health.
Talk to me a little bit about insulin and maybe describe it to me like you're talking to a 5-year-old on the importance of insulin and insulin resistance.
Okay, so insulin it's secreted. It's a hormone in our body. It's secreted by the pancreas in response to carbohydrate intake. So I used the words a couple seconds ago where there's a homeostasis level of glucose within our bloodstream. Anytime we consume carbohydrates, we're going to increase that homeostasis level of glucose within our bloodstream. So carbohydrates get taken in, it gets broken down into the most simplest form, which is glucose. That level rises in our bloodstream, and then in response to that, our body releases insulin from the pancreas to help bring those levels back down to a normal level, to that homeostasis level that I was talking about. Why is that important? So obviously, it helps absorb nutrients essentially, and the less insulin sensitive we are, the more our pancreas has to work in order for that to happen, basically, in order for those nutrients to be uptaken by cells. I guess that's the most simplest way to.
What would the science need to say, or what studies would you need to see, or what would you need to see in the studies to suggest or to change your opinion on artificial sweeteners or to change your opinion on sugar or any topic, really?
So I don't know if you ever heard of like Lane Norton, but
Yeah, I do know. Big fan.
He's awesome, dude. Like, and one of the things that he's always famous for is like human randomized control trials. He's always in his Instagram videos talking about that, and it's so true. It's like, we need data in humans, and like in not just small amounts. Like we need for things to be like conclusive, hard evidence. We need population sizes that are really big. So it takes multiple studies. You can't really prove anything in just one study per se. It's just hard in general to make blanket statements, but like the more human data we have, the more likely things are to be like whatever they're claiming to be. You know what I mean? Like it has to be relevant to us in humans. So that's 100% the thing. It's just, can we see the data, correlate to poor outcomes in humans regarding artificial sweeteners in this case? And obviously that research has yet to be produced, but I'll be curious to see if it does happen in the future. But that's what I need for sure, and that's with anything.
What's your opinion on anecdotal experiences or placebo effects
in terms of artificial sweeteners?
Anything. So, like for example, if we're talking about diet, we're talking about artificial sweeteners. If we're talking about particular workouts, right? If something works uniquely for someone, how do you take that into account in a scientific examination, or if you're going to recommend something to someone else?
So placebo is 100% real. It's super powerful. And like, that's part of the research process, is taking that into consideration. You want like randomized double blind things. So like, if you're giving X drug to a part of the study, you want to give, even though it's not the drug, some pill or something that they may think is the drug. So then it takes away and those research groups shouldn't know if they're getting the drug or not. So placebo can be 100% real in terms of like how to, I guess like what, I don't know, like what, I don't know, like what, you might have to cut this part out.
Nah, dude, ask me a question. What do you got for me?
But like clarify in what sense are you saying like for placebo purposes?
Right. I just think in general, like some of my curiosity comes from you have people who will follow, even in some of these cults, right? They follow a protocol or what this person is saying, and they seem to be healthier, more energetic, living a more, whatever you want to define, fulfilling life.
Yeah.
And I'm not in proponent of these cult followings, but in general, it's, I see Lane Norton going after a lot of these demographics. And my only thought process is, well, even if what he's saying is right, what if anecdotally or placebo effect, these people following this cult leading dietitian, I don't know what to call them, but if they're doing better, is it that big of a problem?
I would argue no. And again, I think you're 100% right. Like if it's not doing harm and it may not be doing anything per se, but like if it's not having a negative outcome, then I don't necessarily think it's harmful. The only thing I have a problem with is like when people, it's just the fear mongering portion, because it's like with so much information on social media about diet, supplementation, training, et cetera, people, it's like analysis or it's paralysis by analysis, just because of the overwhelming amount of information available. And the fear mongering, like I was saying, is like people get scared to make any decision at all. It's like when people don't know what to do, they just don't make an action at all. And like that part can be beneficial in terms of health and fitness 100%. Like, do you know what I mean? So that's where I have a problem with it, is like, I don't like when people make blanket statements about studies that really have very little relevance to human data. You know what I mean?
So exactly. So I think about like processed foods, right? And you hear overly processed foods, avoid processed foods. What does that mean?
So things that are exactly what they're processed, they're not natural. So like, there's one of my favorite people in bodybuilding is Justin Harris, and he talks something about called the pick it, kill it, grow it diet. And that is basically just like an all natural diet. If you can't pick it from the ground, grow it in a garden, or kill it for food or for meat purposes, then it's probably not the best thing to be consuming. So I think that's generally speaking, I think that's a really good rule to live by. The more clean whole foods that you consume, the better you're going to feel, the better you're going to perform, the better you're going to sleep. I think it just all has carryover, and it provides your body all the necessary nutrients and macronutrients that it needs, micro and macronutrients that it needs to perform at an optimal level.
So like bread, pasta products, are those things considered like whole foods, organic, or are those considered processed foods?
So it depends. Those would be, so if they're single ingredient things, I think like from your plan for a period of time, we had like brown rice pasta, and it's like if it's brown rice and that's the ingredient, then that's going to be a whole food. Yeah, it just depends what's on the ingredient label.
Okay. Talk to me a little bit about the science of sleep. Why is sleep so important to recovery, to weight loss, to performance?
Yeah, man. So sleep is everything that you just mentioned. That's what our body needs to basically heighten those parameters, like restoration, cognitive function, growth and repair of tissue. Like all those things take place within the various stages of sleep. There's 5 stages of sleep if you count being fully awake, but there's 3 stages of non-REM, and then there's 3 stages of REM. I'm sorry, 1 stage of REM. REM sleep gets all the hype and is talked about very often, and understandably so, but all stages are important. So, but sleep as a whole is crucial for all the things I just mentioned.
How do we perform if we're under rested and we don't have enough sleep? Because when you look at high performers, normally the first thing that gets sacrificed is sleep. We're staying up late. We have games late. Then we have to wake up the next morning early to get back to film, to training. So I guess how important really is sleep if we're able to operate at a high level, even if we're under rested?
Yeah, I think a couple things come into consideration. Like during the day, I think if you can do things that are going to promote like active recovery. Obviously, we could take this conversation a gazillion different ways, but like generally speaking, active recovery. So things are going to promote blood flow and circulation. That's going to help clear metabolic waste. Things like lactic acid, improve circulation, things like that. But then also, like, you got to think about if you're under recovered as an athlete. If we're talking about an athlete realm here, you want to probably scale intensity and volume to how you're feeling. So you may need to adjust your workout that day or adjust your session based on how you're feeling. There's one thing that one of my mentors, and actually the person I trained with in high school, was really, really good about this, because he had some top mentors himself. But we did what was called a CNS tap test. So what is that? So it's basically assessing your readiness level for that training session on that day. And it was literally an app. And what you would do is like you would tap a button as fast as you can for 30 seconds. And that's been shown to be a very good indicator of how our CNS is functioning. So if we came in one day and, it's in season and, we've gone through a lot, our CNS is taxed by, Wednesday, Thursday, maybe we may go in and have a lighter lifting session, cut volume in half, whatever, but we're going to make adjustments to the training protocol. So we're not putting ourselves at higher injury risk and things like that. So I think there needs to be a heavy focus on form and technique. Also potentially like things like longer warm-ups that also can really help if you're, if you're under recovered and have poor sleep the night prior. One of the things that also his name's PJ Mark, I'll just name him, but he was really big on long warm-ups. And like when we have training sessions in terms of like sprint sessions, we'd be doing 45-minute to an hour warm-ups. And so take that into consideration. And then if you're, chronically fatigued, then you may need to extend that out a little bit further. So just taking those things into consideration, extending the warm-up, and then leveraging caffeine, other ergogenic aids can also obviously be beneficial. I have a cognitive stack that I like to use as well, especially for me right now, being in school, running my business, things like that, things get hard. So I definitely need to leverage certain supplements to kind of help me performing at a high level too.
If you're chronically fatigued and you do some of these tests in day after day, and say you're mid-season or you're prepping for competition and you are consistently under rested, under your peak, how can you as quickly as possible get the rest that you need while training and get yourself at least to some relevance of peak form in a short period of time? Because as you know, in football season, it's week to week. NBA, basketball, it's every other day. Baseball, it's every day. So it's like you only get so many periods of time before you can get yourself back to full performance.
For sure. I think it all starts with sleep, man. I think if you can have a string together a couple nights of rest, that'll drastically change your tolerance for the daily stresses that athletes encounter. So I think that's the most simple answer is how can we set up, sleep habits that are going to be conducive to getting 8-9 hours of sleep and not only just the length, but having quality within that duration. That's going to have the most potent effect on how we manage stress, how we handle stress, and getting back to a more optimal level in terms of recovery.
How do you measure optimal sleep? What does that look like? I know you talked about the different stages. How do we know if we're hitting each stage appropriately?
So I think a lot of times you're going to feel that, subjectively. I think whenever you wake up and you're going to notice certain things, I would say noticing like increased mental clarity, you'll have some probably definitely increased energy, just alertness. You're just going to have that feeling of just being more clear, being more alert and things like that. I think that's probably the easiest way. There's also like sleep tracking apps and things like that you can definitely tap into where they give you like sleep scores. I think that's a fantastic way to do it. But I think most importantly, like if you feel better and you feel more alert and you you're just sharper, then I think that's going to be the most beneficial metric that we can try to measure. Because it's like, if you feel good, then obviously, something's happening there. And I think that's going to be the most important thing to track.
Do you have a bedtime routine that you suggest on how to wind down appropriately to get yourself ready to get optimal sleep?
Absolutely. So I have a stack that I incorporate for a lot of people that I work with, and I do it myself as well. So I guess first I'll talk about the supplement stack in a second, but the habits I think are some of the most important things. Number one, I think having a very calming environment at night is really important. I think getting off your phone, doing things that are going to put you in a very parasympathetic state, listening to a podcast that you enjoy, reading a book, having conversation with your partner, and not fighting, obviously, things that are just like that make you happy, right? But just laying on the couch, but just things that are not going to get you hyped up and stressed, essentially. And I think a lot of times, like without us knowing it, our phones and social media specifically is very poor at that. They're very stress promoting, and things like that. So get off your phone, find something that you enjoy at night that helps you relax. Number two, I'm big on having your room temperature set to like 64 to 65 degrees. The reason for that is like that helps regulate core body temperature, which already naturally drops at nighttime. So that's just part of the natural sleep wake cycle. And your body tends to decrease like 1 to 2 degrees Fahrenheit while you sleep. So a cooler room just kind of helps that process just occur more naturally. And just promotes a more restful sleep, essentially. And then I love to incorporate red light glasses. You'll hear people talk about blue light, red light. They're both beneficial. I like red light a little bit more just because it blocks a wider spectrum of light, which can still impact melatonin production. And melatonin obviously increases as darkness occurs. And that's what helps, give us that like sleepy feeling, essentially. So I like to incorporate red light glasses as well, just to kind of block out anything that's going to inhibit melatonin production. And then lastly, I like to incorporate an extremely dark room. So like blackout shades are really highly encouraged. The darker environment, again, melatonin production, you're going to have more restful sleep, and it's just overall going to be better. And then in terms of the stack, so I like to incorporate 4 things pretty simply. So there's 2 types of magnesiums. There's magnesium glycinate and magnesium L-threonate. Those 2 are some of the most bioavailable forms of magnesium. There's a lot of magnesium forms that aren't very highly bioavailable. And then those 2 actually are able to cross the blood-brain barrier. So they can actually have a potent effect on our brains and promote that calming effect that we want from a magnesium supplement. Not to get too sidetracked, but one of the biggest pet peeves I have is there's a lot of magnesium supplements that are marketed in a wrong way. Like you'll see, like very commonly, mag citrate is often promoted for like having calming effects, but that's going to have more of a GI motility effect because of where it works. It's not going to cross the blood-brain barrier. It's going to have a more potent. It's actually, like I said, GI motility. So not to get off too much of a tangent of different forms of magnesium, but that's why I do those 2 types of magnesium. And then the last 2 is chamomile and valerian root. Those basically act as mild sedatives. As you can tell, it's natural, but they have the natural sedative effect, and they just have a very, that whole combination of the supplements just have a very potent calming effect. I've seen great success with it in clients. I like it myself. If you set up that environment with that supplement stack, I think it's a fantastic way to promote the most restful sleep possible.
How do you feel about TV before bed?
About what? I'm sorry.
About TV before bed.
TV, but as long as you have the glasses on and it's not something that is stressful, or like you're watching like something political or something you can get like really heated about or something like that, like I'm okay with it. If it's enjoyable and keeping you in a parasympathetic state, then I'm okay with that. And like I said, as long as the blue light isn't really messing with your melatonin production, then I'm okay with it.
When is an ideal time to shut off the TV or put your phone away before bed? How long before going to sleep?
I always like to say roughly an hour and a half. I think that's a really good time. Or it gives you enough time to help start winding down. Again, if it's something that is enjoyable and it's just keeping you in a parasympathetic state, you can probably cut that down a little bit closer, but definitely phone time, I would say hour and a half. But if it's, like I said, if we're talking about like a TV show or a podcast you're watching on YouTube or a comedy something like that, then I think it could be a little bit closer to bedtime, but you can never go wrong with probably about an hour and a half or so.
Is there any science that suggests you shouldn't eat close to bed or drink fluids close to bed, or does that not have an impact on your sleep?
It should have zero impact on sleep, honestly. What people find actually is like through intense dieting phases, when carbohydrates are getting really low, and this typically applies to like physique athletes more so than anything, but you'll find sometimes like that people's sleep will actually be hindered when they don't have carbohydrates around bedtime. So as a coach, sometimes I'll need to adjust that, put carbs pre-bed, and you actually see an increase in recovery, drop cortisol levels, lower water retention, decreased inflammation, all those things, which obviously which is very beneficial for the athlete. So yeah, actually that should have no impact. If anything, it should have a positive impact.
So the crew of experts that suggest fasting before bed, what are they looking at that's wrong?
Honestly, I think people overcomplicate things. I think it just comes down to like, it's calories in, calories out. Now, does that equation get more nuanced? Absolutely, 100%. But overall, if you're consuming less energy, then yeah, if you're burning more energy than you're consuming in the day, then it really doesn't matter. So for me, I think that's a kind of a moot point. Like it doesn't really matter. There is no real benefit to that, in my opinion.
I think where the calories in, calories out conversation got hijacked is people who took it on opposite ends of the spectrum. So people who say calories in, calories out, oh, well, I'll just eat 3 Twinkies all day and I'll be the same as if I'm someone who ate, steak and ground beef and chicken, when the people who say calories in, calories out are not advocating for that. They're just saying that the science suggests that it's how much you burning versus how much you taking in.
Exactly. And like I said, it gets nuanced. Like, yes, if you eat 3 Twinkies a day and you're consuming very little protein, like your body composition is going to be vastly different. So there's that side. And obviously I would never advocate for doing that, but like, so I don't, again, it just becomes nuanced. It's like, what is your goal? And if fat loss and muscle retention is obviously like your number one priority, then yes, you want to have a high protein diet. But again, it's like if you're eating less calories than you are consuming, then you're going to lose weight. And again, and if you're not having adequate protein, you're not training, then that weight can come from muscle mass, but you're still going to technically lose weight.
Sorry to jump around topics here. If you are drowsy after getting a long night of sleep, what is wrong about your sleep if you're getting a good number of hours, but you still feel drowsy, fatigued, underrested, cognitively slow?
So I think it's probably inadequate REM sleep. I would say REM sleep is essential for brain function, consolidation, learning, mood regulation, solidifying memory, learning, creativity, things like that. Like, and energy levels for sure. So I would say that's probably what's hindered the most. And it's like, then it goes back to the prior conversations. Like, how do we promote a beneficial sleep environment to help improve that? And it's like, this is a little bit of a side topic as well. But one of the things that we're seeing in modern day is the use of THC pre-bed. I think that's becoming massively common. And I think personally, I think that's a big mistake. If you look at the research, like THC actually hinders REM sleep. So if you look at a lot of studies around that, I try to, anyone that comes to me, any of my clients are like, hey, I use gummies or whatever like that. Like, that's fine. But I really try to steer them away from that, from being dependent on THC to sleep, just because of what the studies are showing. And not only for short-term effects, but long-term effects when you have, negative REM sleep. So I try to pull them into other things like my sleep stack, like the sleep habits, really focus on the habit part, and do things a little bit more like naturally per se, or things that aren't going to impact REM sleep as much to benefit them.
If you can't get adequate sleep every night, are you screwed? Or what are some of the active recovery tactics that you could implement that have some sort of support that you can recover, as an athlete? I'm competing, right? So you look at athletes who are married, have kids, and are required to go out there and perform at a high level every week. The truth of the matter is you're not going to be able to get as optimal sleep as you would like, so it's how can I maximize my recovery if I can't get that best sleep?
Man, there's a whole host of things. I mean, you could talk about, ensuring diet, adequate hydration, micronutrient surplus, some other modalities. I would say, like, if you have time to like incorporate like Epsom salt baths, ART, like, tissue work. I don't know. Are you familiar with ART at all?
High level.
What's that?
Just a high level. So I would encourage you to dive deeper into it.
Okay, got you. So that's like, so ART kind of breaks, well, at the most simplest and basic form, it really helps prevent like muscle imbalances. So obviously, if you have tightness in certain areas, you're going to be more prone for injury. And if you're, chronically stressed and under recovered, you're obviously going to have an even further increased risk. So you want to mitigate that risk by doing things like tissue work and active recovery. Active recovery is really cool because it helps break up scar tissue and things like that. But if, for example, if I want to even out the range of motion in my pecs, they do things like where they do like I don't want to say trigger points, but they dig into the tissue and they have you go through active range of motion with pressure points, and it helps break up, like just scar tissue and things like that, and really helps open the muscle tissue up and just promote just a more balanced physique and musculature. So if you can incorporate things like that, and even things simple as massage, I think it all can be beneficial. All things are going to promote blood flow. Again, not to get too like sidetracked, but like anything that is promoting blood flow is going to promote healing, and promoting healing is going to promote recovery. So anything like that is going to be extremely beneficial.
Talk to me about ice, heat. Do those create blood flow? Are they good? When do you do each?
So again, it comes down to what I was just saying normally, or what I was just saying a couple seconds ago, like promoting circulation is going to be really, really important. That's going to promote delivery of oxygen, nutrients, immune cells, growth factors, things like that. Whenever you think about this at a cellular level, ice is going to cause vasoconstriction. So all those things that I just mentioned is going to make that process harder when you incorporate ice into any sort of injury. Okay. And then heat is going to promote vasodilation. So the blood vessels are going to essentially expand and promote delivery of all those things that I just mentioned. So yes, do you want to mitigate pain and inflammation to a certain degree? Of course, but I would argue 99% of the time, you're going to have a much greater benefit incorporating heat into your recovery modalities, especially for soft tissue injuries.
I like to keep my opinions off the show, but I hate when people tell me to ice. I get so frustrated because I heard a decade ago, actually from a former, someone who's in the military, and they were talking about how we don't ice because at the end of the day, ice reduces inflammation. Inflammation creates blood flow creates healing. And that simple of an explanation has stuck with me forever. And so now every time someone tells me to ice, I get not angry, but I'm like, okay, I'm not going to ice. It's like, tell me something else to do.
Honestly, it just proves like lack of knowledge, to be honest with you. And it's like, if you think about it from exactly like you say, like that was a very layman's terms way to put it. And it just makes sense. Like when you think about it and you break it down, you know, the science, like, yes, you want to promote blood flow, and that's going to promote recovery. And then the inflammatory process is necessary in healing. It is. And like, I even say this about, again, side topic, but one of my biggest pet peeves is when people like cold tub immersion therapy that people are talking about.
I was waiting for this to come up.
that's so freaking big nowadays, dude. I can't stand it because it's like if hypertrophy is your goal, which for 99% of the population it should be. I don't care what age you are. I don't care who you are. Hypertrophy should always be the goal. You're going to be healthier. You're going to live longer, et cetera, et cetera. That's a whole different topic. But the cold tub immersion therapy hinders the inflammatory response necessary for muscle growth. So it's like, why is this so mainstream? And like, I always say, like, I get it. There are certain nuances where it may be applicable. Like if people like to just wake up and challenge themselves, like I guess like the mental fortitude benefit, like I guess I can roll with that. Or if you're in training camp, um, and you're really, really sore, whatever, maybe has some application there. But even then, I don't love that because I'd rather do some sort of like soft tissue work and heating to promote circulation, i.e. recovery, oxygen delivery, like all those things are going to promote recovery versus hopping in an ice bath. I don't know how it was at Pitt, but like I know when I was at Temple, dude, like we were literally required to get an ice bath, and I was just like, this is just suboptimal, and it just is like.
So Pitt, we actually weren't required. We were required for the most part at Bucknell. Is there any benefit to contrast? Hot, cold, or no?
1,000 that is better. So actually, so there's another shout out to PJ Marks again on this. So when I was a younger athlete, we would do, and I was like, either in season or just really CNS was really taxed. We would incorporate contrast showers. So that's a period of time where you're doing like a minute of super cold and then a minute of super hot, and that just like when you get out of the shower, it almost has like a
You're lightheaded.
yeah, it almost gives you like a euphoric feeling, but that's been shown to have a really beneficial effect on recovery, especially within our central nervous system.
So is contrast better than just heat, or should you go heat over contrast?
That gets very nuanced. I think if you're looking for an overall CNS recovery, I think that is probably more beneficial with contrast. I think if you're looking for like specific soft tissue injuries for healing in terms of that, then I think just heat is probably adequate.
Now, what supplementation can you use for recovery?
Are we talking outside of like just normal like collagen, whey protein, things like that? Are we talking about like other things?
Include those because I have a feeling a lot of my listeners didn't know that that was part of the recovery process.
Dude, I mean, absolutely. I think so. Protein, number one, that's the building blocks for everything. Amino acids are important for repair of all tissues.
How much protein, sorry to cut you off, how much protein in general should you be getting in your diet? And is there a point where you can over protein or protein loses its benefit?
So I always say this, generally speaking, what I like to do with people's diets is I like to set protein around what their approximated like lean body mass is. Typically that's a really good guideline to go off of. I do this having the physique competitor nature in background. I do like to keep protein a little bit higher for certain people. Anecdotally, again, this is not supported by science, but when working with bodybuilders and things like that, I think in physique athletes in general, I think higher protein amounts elicit a little bit more growth just from what I've seen. Again, not everybody, that doesn't apply to every population, but I think with people that are heavily focused in the physique realm, I think that can have some benefit. But there definitely is a point where protein becomes unnecessary. Just it ends up being turned like goes through gluconeogenesis and used as actually fancy way of saying it gets turned to glucose and used for energy is what that means. So what that number is, it's really hard to say. But what I don't want to do as a coach and as an athlete, like I don't want to be on the bottom range or flirting with not getting enough protein. So I think it's always just beneficial to kind of overestimate and be in that realm. But I think a very good general thumb is just be grams in number of grams equal to your pounds of lean mass, essentially.
All right, perfect. Now back to supplements for recovery.
So protein, like I said, obviously, whole foods first, and then supplement with whey protein to get that number. And then healthy fats like omega-3s, very potent anti-inflammatory properties, reduce stress, um, you know, just really, really good for the healing process in general. Vitamin C, crucial for collagen synthesis, which is important for rebuilding like connective tissue. Also has antioxidant properties, so I think you can never have enough vitamin C. Vitamin D as well also plays a role in like bone health, calcium absorption, also hormone production as well. So I think that's really beneficial. Obviously, water. So hydration, crucial for maintaining cellular function, nutrient delivery to tissues, helps promote circulation, all those things. And then lastly, like carbohydrates, obviously, like you want to replenish glycogen stores in muscles. That's going to provide energy for like recovery processes. So I think that's, in terms of diet, I think those are probably like the main things. And then you can add in supplementation protocols like, I love Epsom salt baths. I love things like, if you want to like peptide route, obviously I think BPC 157 is unbelievable, and TB 500. Again, I've seen crazy anecdotal evidence on that in, tons of people, and then obviously including myself as well. So I would say those are probably like the biggest players that come to mind.
So if we were to structure our diet and supplements for recovery in sleep, how many hours of sleep? What's a high level optimal diet? And what are your go-to supplements right out of the gate?
So if we're focusing on recovery, so generally speaking, I think 8 to 9 hours of really high quality sleep is going to.
I'm already behind the 8 ball. All right.
Hey, you're a dad with 2 kids, so I think that's understandable. But yeah, 8 to 9 hours, I think in most studies is shown to be pretty damn optimal. Diet wise, all the things that I just mentioned, everything. Supplementation wise, I would say whey protein. I would incorporate creatine. I would supplement with like 1,000 mgs of vitamin C a day. I would throw magnesium in there, vitamin D3, K2. I would do the Epsom salt baths, soft tissue recovery. I think all those things.
Is electrolytes, are those beneficial at all, or is that kind of overhyped?
So no, they certainly can be. I mean, our cells need adequate our whole body needs electrolytes, but like to perform optimally, yes, electrolytes are important. So I think supplementing with them has merit. But if you're consuming a diet that is largely whole foods, plenty of fruits, plenty of vegetables, I think you're going to get plenty of the micronutrients and electrolytes that you need. So I think it can't hurt, basically, put it that way. But I think you can cover your bases through diet mainly.
With the protein piece, going back to that, between the whey protein powder and getting protein from your actual diet, is there an unhealthy amount of whey protein powder that you can have? Or does it matter if you're getting your protein in grams from that versus, ground beef or chicken?
So that's a great question. I'm always going to tell people, if you can consume all your protein through whole protein sources, I would prefer that. Again, whey protein is a supplement. It's exactly that. It is supposed to supplement what we are already doing through our main diet. The most important thing that people should keep in mind, whether it's for athletes or physique development, whatever it may be, is like, we basically want to keep a stable amino acid profile within our bloodstream as long as possible throughout the day. And how do we do that? The best way to do that is through whole protein sources. And the reason for that is because they take a really long time to break down. And so you're basically, as they're breaking down through hours and hours, you're going to have a constant release of essential amino acids into our bloodstream. And that's going to have a really potent effect on recovery, hypertrophy, all the things that are important for athletes or anybody looking to develop their physique. So I always say that if you can consume that goal of protein through whole protein sources, do it. Now, lifestyle factors and a lot of other things come into play, like where you may not be able to have chicken or steak or fish or whatever it may be 4 or 5 times a day. But that's where protein powder comes in, and there's nothing wrong with that. Protein powder is great; it's fantastic. Can you have too much of it? I think it depends on the person. Some people have a problem with digestion. Some people, report side effects like acne and things like that. So it's very dependent on the person. But I think the general rule of thumb is try to consume most of your protein sources through whole protein sources.
How long does it take for your diet that you're implementing to begin to take effect?
Oh, another great question. So really fast, honestly. From people that I've worked with, people that have no idea what they're doing in terms of nutrition. When they get on my diet plans, typically I hear positive results within like 2 days. Like they'll notice increased energy levels, decreased cravings, better sleep quality, just better performance in the gym, like all these things that are higher libido, like so many things. So I think it can take place within 24 to 48 hours, 100%.
So when you're transitioning maybe from I want to go from fueling for recovery, now I need to switch and fuel for performance. I got a game in 2 days. What does that switch look like? How different is your diet actually changing?
Not a whole lot. The only thing that I would incorporate is a little bit higher carbohydrate amounts. I think you can kind of appreciate this is like I'm very big with carb cycling. And what I try to do with you, obviously I know I don't have control of your training specifically, but I have higher carbohydrate amounts on training days and lower amounts of carbohydrates on non-training days. Just because for performance purposes, glycogen is going to be our main preferred fuel source. So I want to make sure we're adequately supplying the body with the energy needs for whatever session that you're performing. So I think it's very simply all the things that I talked about prior, and then just adding a little bit higher carbohydrate amount is what's going to help fuel prefer.
I think one thing that can feel overwhelming for people who take this stuff seriously is all of the things to take into consideration.
100%.
So all the different supplements that we've named today, all the different types of foods, diets, things that you can kind of incorporate the recovery, modules. How can you keep it simple? Or if you're someone who doesn't have access to a resource like you, how can they keep this simple day to day and make sure that they're doing the best that they can to recover and perform at a high level?
Very simple. Let's stick to the basics. And anyone that I work with or comes into my program, I try to preach these things too. It's like, what are the pillars that we really need to focus on? They're going to be the biggest driver in terms of physique development or for performance purposes is always going to be nutrition, sleep, and training intensity, essentially. Like if you can establish those, that's going to have the biggest role and the biggest player in your progress, whatever goal that may be. So if you can establish the quality sleep habits, like, try to get 7, 8, 9 hours of sleep. If you can eat mainly whole foods, have plenty of fruits and vegetables, consume, enough protein and with your carbohydrate intake, again, whole food sources, like stay away from refined, simple sugars. And I think that at the most basic level are the things to focus on. And then in terms of the gym, just making sure you are not only performing things like technique wise, like safely, but also producing enough intensity to force a growth stimulus if hypertrophy is your goal, which obviously for most people it is, even athlete or not. You want to get stronger, you want to get bigger. So, intensity and technique, but yeah, I think if you can establish those three things, you're going to be just fine for the most part.
I should have asked you this question earlier. Can you define hypertrophy in layman's terms for my listeners?
Yeah, just simply means just muscle growth. That's all hypertrophy is. It's just the accrual of new muscle tissue.
Beautiful. Well said. Now, dieting on a budget. How do we do it?
Man, another great topic here. So this is another thing that kind of fires me up, being just in the field that I am. You hear all the time about people saying, "Oh, it's too expensive to eat healthy," and I largely disagree with that. if you avail yourself of the opportunities that are out there. Like for me, I mean, don't get me wrong. When you go to, like, for us in Western Pennsylvania, we have like Giant Eagle. There are some prices that are getting steep. There's no doubt. There's been a drastic increase in food prices over the past couple of years. There's no question about that. I'm not going to sit here and deny that. It's just the facts. However, there's still ways to eat really healthy and have it be budget friendly. Number one, food stores. Let's talk about the options. Like you can incorporate something like Aldi.
Love Aldi. I'm an Aldi loyalist. I could be a trillionaire. I'm going to Aldi. Continue.
Yep, Aldi's fantastic. So, or Costco, Sam's Club, things where you can truly purchase things in bulk where the unit price itself is a lot less. I think you have to leverage those things. The other thing that you commonly see from Americans in all across the world, but like people tend to buy so much excess snacks, candy, things that they just don't need. Where if they focused on whole protein sources, everything we've talked about in this podcast so far, whole protein sources, rice, sweet potatoes, whatever it may be, oatmeal, things like that, olive oil, avocados, plenty of produce, fruits and vegetables. Your grocery bill does not have to be that crazy. Like, Aldi's produce is extremely cheap and it's relatively pretty quality. So
that was going to be my next question. Quality wise, we're looking at grass-fed beef versus a regular beef, whatever. Yeah. Is there an actual difference in the quality?
So,
or are we just being hoodwinked for the wealthy crowd?
So this gets really nuanced as well. But like, actually, this is funny. One of my current clients just asked me about this today. So the data, like, let's just take produce for a second. Like, let's just talk about like fruits and vegetables. Is there a drastic difference between organic and not? So the scientific studies right now are weak on that in terms of like actual negative impacts on human health. There are things like glyphosate and things like that are like pesticides and things like that aren't great. But again, in most organic and non-organic produce, like there's pesticide used on both, just in just a little bit varying forms. So I don't think there's a ton of evidence that says they are drastically different. I think that a lot of that research still needs to be done and to have a better conclusion. But I think if you can afford organic, go for it, do it. I don't think it's going to be obviously negative in any fashion. But I think if your wallet doesn't really allow it and you can't eat organic, I'd still rather you eat fruits and vegetables than not, put it that way. You know what I mean? I think where you potentially can see a problem that people make the argument is sometimes in gut health. Like I'm very big on gut health, but some people may tend to experience like worse gut health over time when you're consuming things that have antibiotics in them and things like that can have a poor outcome for gut microbiota. And that's touching more on obviously the meat aspect, but so I think it's probably more relevant to the meat conversation. I think organic grass-fed from a meat perspective is probably going to be more beneficial than if you have something like where, potentially antibiotics are used or things like that. That I definitely think there's going to be a much bigger disparity in terms of health outcomes. So I think just to kind of sum it up and put it in simple terms, I think fruits, produce-wise, data right now a little bit inconclusive, or it's not very strong in terms of one versus the other being worse. I think meat wise there's going to be a little bit more of a, like I said, drastic difference in terms of health outcomes, specifically gut health.
Red meat versus white meat, is there beneficial one way or the other? What's the difference there? If I have to pick between a chicken and a steak, what am I doing?
So really the difference is just the amino acid profiles. There's just different amino acid profiles in both. I like in my diets to incorporate different protein sources. I think 3 to 4 is a great way just to make sure you're adequate in all amino acids. So what, chicken, eggs, beef, Greek yogurt, things like that. I think if you have a very vast or a variety of protein sources, I think that's gonna be the best way to cover that very simply.
Does our biology or genetics play in all this? Is there a specific diet for a specific biology or specific supplements for someone who has a specific genetic profile? Where does that play in this? And is there any way to actually test that?
That's a great question. Actually, so in terms of the research on that, I'm actually not super familiar. It's one thing I've not touched on. Now, things that I've heard, I think there are certain dietary things that you need to take into consideration based on genetics, ethnicities, and things like that. Like if you look at like the African American population, they're more readily susceptible to heart disease and hypertension. So I think being cognizant of weight, of metabolic function, of our omega-3 intake, like healthy fats. I think all the things that go into health and nutrition, I think should be probably taken into a little bit more consideration with African Americans and certain ethnic populations, just based on what we've seen, just based on some of that data. But I'm not fully aware of like how we are testing those things in terms of like concrete research.
I appreciate you coming on today. There's so much more to discuss on this topic. We'll get a round 3 here eventually in the future as we continue to dive into diet, nutrition, supplementation. If you're working on anything, you want to promote anything, please take the time to do so.
Nothing really special at the moment. Just obviously just shout, just a little plug my coaching business here. If you want to potentially work with me, you can go to my Instagram at Kyle Baum 2. You can fill out my application for coaching. But other than that, nothing too crazy. Business is definitely is growing at a great rate right now. I'm super stoked about it. Obviously, this is my passion. I love what I do. Obviously, I'm still very busy with my nurse anesthesia program and things like that. But the coaching aspect and changing people's lives with health and fitness is really, really it's impactful for me, and I just love it. So yeah, if you have any desire to work with me, obviously just head over to my Instagram.
Give him a quick plug. He does all my stuff. He's phenomenal. Thanks for coming on, Kyle. Listeners, thank you for tuning in. Press the like button, download, subscribe, send to a friend. 5 stars only. Check us out at athleticfortitude.com. See you guys next week.